Good afternoon. Welcome to this session called Time to Act for Coral Reefs. This is a panel in the Monaco Ocean Week, and I have the honor of moderating this panel. My name is David Obura. I'm a director of Cordy East Africa. We're an African non-profit research organization based in Kenya. I chair the IUCN Coral Specialist Group, and I'm a member of the Earth Commission, a newly formed panel of scientists investigating the bounds for a safe and just planet in coming years and decades. It's my pleasure to moderate this panel, and this week provides an opportunity for synergies for ocean conservation, in the context of the UN decades on ecosystem restoration and ocean science. The panel brings the world of coral reefs to the fore, their prospects and potential solutions in coming years, through 7 very experienced and accomplished experts across topics from monitoring to modeling, restoration and conservation of corals in nature and in aquaria, and global policy. We will start with a welcome and then 6 talks and then finish with 20 minutes or so of open discussion. So please be ready to participate through the chat function. We also have simultaneous interpretation in English, French and Spanish, so please use that if you need to. So let me start with a welcome message from His Excellency Bernard Fautrier, and then I will introduce each speaker as their turn comes up. Monsieur Fautrier represents Monaco as a co-chair of the International Coral Reef Initiative and is an advisor for the environment to His Serene Highness Prince Albert I of Monaco. Monsieur Fautrier, please, you're muted.
Hear me now? Is it okay? Okay, thank you, David. Good morning, afternoon, or evening to everybody. It's a pleasure to meet you, even if it's only through the screen. I suppose that everybody knows what is ICRI, but as a matter of confirmation, ICRI is an informal partnership between nations and organizations that strive to preserve coral reefs and related ecosystems everywhere around the world, and mainly by promoting sustainable management practices, by building capacity, raising awareness, and promoting action to address the continuing decline of coral reef. It was founded in 1994, initially by 8 countries, and has now over 90 members, including 44 countries, which are custodians of more than 75% of the world coral reefs. So that's a strange consequence of the pandemic. We started to co-chair ICRI with our friends of Australia in Indonesia at the middle of 2018. It was supposed to last only 1 year and a half, but okay, the adverse consequences led to maintain this co-chairing until this year, until middle of 2021. In any case, it was maybe an interesting and fruitful mandate. During this period, we have admitted 15 new members in ICRI, and we are very proud to count about this new member, the European Union. That's mainly thanks to the action led by His Serene Highness the Prince towards the European Commissioner, but also important countries like Canada and Germany. So I think that the fact that new countries are joining ICRI shows the interest for the situation of corals, and we are really satisfied of this. This increased level of attention on coral reefs has been also to increase the number of fora in which ICRI has been engaged. And I think we will have the opportunity in the frame of this event to have a good snapshot of the main ICRI's works of the last years. the first result of the GCIRMN status of coral reef of the world. You are aware that the last one is all of more than 12 years, as far as I remember. Also to know more about work on restoration. And also to stress the fact that it's more and more important of considering coral reefs at the international level. ICRI has presented a united voice on the inclusion of coral reefs in the global biodiversity framework, which was expected to be agreed and decided at the next CBD meeting in China. And we are, let's say, proud to consider that the 99% of our proposals has been agreed in this frame. Okay, to complete, just to inform you, if you're not yet aware, that we are finally coming to an end at the middle of this year as a co-chair of ICRI, and something which is particularly pleasant is to know that we could pass the chairmanship of ICRI to United States, was agreed to do it. And after this bad night of 4 years, it's another example that United States is again with us in our concern and in our action for global environment. Thank you. The floor is yours, David.
Thank you, Monsieur Fortry, for that welcome message to all. And indeed, while it has been a difficult 2 years, perhaps, with COVID, we're coming out of it, and perhaps the greater interest in ICRI is matching the plight of coral reefs and the need for much greater commitment, and the good news that you've passed to us on the passing of the chair of ICRI in the next secretariat. So welcome news. We'll now turn to the presenters. And the first will be a presentation of one of the main elements of ICRI's work in the last few years that Monsieur Fortry referred to. And this is on the Status of Coral Reefs of the World report for 2021. Now, this is the first of these global reports that has been produced in over 12 years now. We have the honor of having Dr. David Suter to present it. Dr. Suter is the Chief Research Officer at the Australian Institute of Marine Science, and he's the Global Coordinator of the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network, the GCRMN. He has wide experience in coral reef research and tropical coastal ecosystems management in Australia, the Indian Ocean, and Southeast Asia. We will, because of this is a special presentation, we will have some time for questions immediately after the presentation. So if you have direct questions in relation to his presentation, please do write those into the chat box. And then after that, we'll go on to the next set of presentations. So thank you. Over to you, David. And please bear with us while the presentation comes online.
David, are you seeing that now?
That's good. Thank you, David. Please proceed.
And it's in presenter mode. Thank you for the introduction, David. My apologies for the minor technical glitch as you were running through the introduction. Before I kick off, I would love to thank Monsieur Fortrier, the Principality of Monaco, and the ICRI Secretariat for the opportunity to give you all a sneak preview of the latest GCRMN report, which will be released in the very near future. I am making this presentation on behalf of many people for this particular report, we had many hundreds of data contributors, scientists and organisations, many regional experts who helped us with the interpretation of the analyses behind the report. But in particular, we have a core group of editorial people who have really shaped the report into the form that it currently is. In particular, I'd like to thank Serge Flan, Jeremy Bickart, Murray Logan, who did many of the statistical analyses, Francis Staub from the ICRI Secretariat, and tonight our moderator, David Obura, has also provided considerable assistance. So with that, I'd like, first of all, to, I guess, introduce the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network. Like ICRI, it was established in the mid-90s. The GCRMN, as we call it, is an operational network of the International Coral Reef Initiative and a core part of the work of ICRI. The GCRMN is made up of many hundreds of coral reef scientists, managers and organisations around the world. And the primary role of the GCRMN is to report on the status and trends in the condition of the world's reefs. And that is indeed what this report is all about. The GCRMN operates through 10 different regional nodes, working left to right across the screen. We have the Western Indian Ocean, we have the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, we have the Rockney Sea area, South Asia, East Asia, Australia, the Pacific, the Eastern Tropical Pacific, the Caribbean, and the Southern Atlantic or Brazil region. And in each of those regions, we have a coordinator, and those coordinators are critical to the success of the GCRMN. The GCRMN has 4 primary objectives. The first of which is really associated with the status reports that we write, and that's to improve the understanding and awareness of the condition of coral reefs around the world. And this is not just the fish and the corals, but it's also the socioeconomic elements of coral reefs as well. We also provide the scientific underpinnings for support of management and policy development in many regions of the world. We have a fundamental belief that we should be using our coral reef monitoring data much more effectively, and we should be reusing it over and over again. We certainly learned an awful lot about the state of the world's coral reefs data in the production of this particular report, and that'll be a focus of the GCRMN once we've released the report and going forwards. Our final objective is really to help coral reef monitoring programs around the world to build capacity to collect, analyse and report on coral reef data at local, national and at regional levels. And how do we do this? We produce a range of targeted products. Throughout the history of the GCRMN, regional coordinators and regional scientists have produced a range of regional reports. Most recently, we've seen the Western Indian Ocean and the Pacific release recent reports, but historically, we've seen quite a famous report, I guess, from the Caribbean in the early 2010s. We also produce a range of thematic reports that are focused on specific events. So the two of most note are after the 2004 tsunami and the significant bleaching and hurricane event in the Caribbean in 2005. We also produce a whole range of different monitoring manuals to assist with programs to build that capacity to measure their coral reefs. The flagship, however, of the Great Barrier, the GCRMN, is really the status of coral reefs of the world reports. Over the years, the GCRMN, and led by Clive Wilkinson, has produced 5 of these reports. Monsieur Fortrier, in his introduction, mentioned that the last report was in 2008. So this current report that we're finalising now is the first for 12 full years, almost 13 years, and an awful lot has happened to coral reefs in that time. This report, or previous reports, had been based on the contributions of many, many people from different regions, and Clive used to synthesize what was literally thousands of pages of contributions into a few hundred-page document that was easily digestible, and it was a qualitative synthesis. These reports had very, very high impact, particularly among NGOs, governments, and the UN community. And we certainly hope to reach those particular communities with this new report as well. Critically, though, organisations like UNEP recognise that the work of the GCRMN and the scientists that make up the network are a primary vehicle for monitoring progress towards SDG goals and AICRI targets. And later this evening, Emily Corcoran will provide a presentation on some of the recommended indicators for the CBD post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework that we can use to measure the health of coral reefs. And certainly we will see the links between the GCRMN and some of those indicators that ICRI have been recommended. So, as I've said, this will be the first report for quite some time. A lot has happened. The GCRMN has been going through somewhat of a hiatus over the last number of years. But in the last few years, we've been through quite a solid reinvigoration process in response to resolutions from UNEA and calls from ICRI to develop further indicators for coral reefs, conduct additional regional assessments, produce another global report, which we have almost done, and in particular, develop a roadmap for strengthening the GCRMN. So since the production of the implementation and governance plan, which was endorsed at the Monaco General Meeting of ICRI in late 2018, David Obura was the principal author of that implementation and governance plan. The ICRI Secretariat, with considerable assistance from the Australian Government through the Department of Foreign Affairs, through Monaco, through the Prince Albert II Foundation, and with assistance from UNEP and my organisation, the Australian Institute of Marine Science, we've been leading the reinvigoration of the GCRMN, strengthening the network through a range of different regional workshops, and bringing the ongoing commitment from scientists and organisations around the world to bring to bear on this coming report. So this report will be somewhat different to previous reports. We aim to make this report quite short and easily digestible. Importantly, though, this will be the first report that will be based on a single coherent global data set that many contributors have provided data from. The data set itself extends 40 odd years. The first data that we've received came from 1978 from the Chagos Archipelago. The data spans almost 12,000 sites across 75 different countries. So that's almost every country that has coral reefs. And it has almost 2 million observations. Importantly, the analyses that we've conducted for the report focus specifically on the cover of algae and the cover of coral. These are the two indicators that were measured across the world and across different monitoring programs with sufficient consistency that we were able to aggregate them into a coherent data set. Unfortunately, because of the huge variation in the way people collect fish data, we haven't been able to quantitatively analyse the abundance or biomass of fish. Any discussion about fish is relatively qualitative and contributed by regional experts. But this is clearly a point where we can strengthen the network and harmonise the way in which we collect these fish data so that future reports will have as solid a quantitative analysis of fish communities as we have for coral and algae. In particular, though, I would like to thank Jeremy Vickart and Serge Pines in particular for the effort that they've made to liaise with the data contributors and to pull this data set together in a way that we can analyse it. The primary focus of the report will be on global status and trends. So there will be a substantial chapter on the average global coral cover over time, over the last 40 years. We have sought to increase the weight of evidence of the analysis itself through the input of experts from around the world in terms of the interpretation of the analysis, and we're drawing on relevant literature where it makes sense to do so. In addition to the global chapters, there is 10 regional chapters, one for each of the GCRMN regions. These regional chapters, and I'll give you an example of the Pacific in a second, they provide information at much greater resolution than at the global scale. And so we're able to discuss key pressures affecting coral reefs at regional and sub-regional scales. Each of the regional chapters has been produced with a standardised template, so there's consistency across the different regions, which will enable some of the reader of the report to compare across regions very, very easily. In producing these regional reports, we've gone back to the local experts and sought their expertise to validate the outputs of the models to make sure that the models faithfully reflect the patterns of condition of corals in their particular regions. And we were also drawing on their expertise to really describe the primary drivers of change in their regions in terms of cover of hard coral and algae. The photo in this particular slide is from a substantial workshop we held in Bangkok early last year. We are eternally grateful to the 45 odd people who attended this particular workshop. It was right at the outbreak, at the initiation, I guess, of the COVID pandemic. And we still had the commitment of those people to come to this workshop. And that workshop was really the launching pad, if you like, for the report in its current form. In addition to the regional chapters, we have about a dozen specific highlight boxes that are on particular issues, and these boxes are written by recognised global experts. So we're covering things like marine heat waves and bleaching, ocean acidification, reef restoration, policy and management. We have a box specifically addressing a new initiative from Vulcan, the Allen Coral Atlas, which as it matures will more than improve the accuracy of reef extent around the world, so that the analyses that we've done in this report will be more and more accurate as we go forward. Finally, the report will have the executive, thank you to UNEP, the executive summary will be translated into UN languages. So a bit of a sneak preview of some of the results that we'll present in the report. These results are from the Pacific region. The analyses that we've done, the figure on the top left of this particular slide indicates not only the location of monitoring sites that we've received data from around the Pacific, but also the duration of those monitoring sites. So you'll see that a lot of sites were monitored only once, but in the Pacific, there's a substantial number of sites that actually have more than 20 years of data, or a 20-year span between the first surveys and the last surveys. And these sites are particularly valuable when it comes to determining change over time. In order to produce the trends that we see on the right-hand side of the slide, these trends are regional. So this is essentially the modeled or estimated average coral cover and algal cover across the entire Pacific region. Clearly, in the Pacific, up until 1998, coral cover was quite high and quite stable. We see a blip with the 98 bleaching event. We see a moderate decline over time, some recovery, and then we see the influence of the 2014, 2015, 16, and 17 bleaching events in the Pacific. And I think Gabriel Grimstitch will talk about this later on in the session. We also see in the Pacific that as coral has declined, algal cover has increased. So we're seeing a change in the community composition in the Pacific region. In terms of specific subregions, so in order to do the analyses, we've essentially built hierarchical statistical models using the marine ecosystems of the world, ecoregions as the foundation. We've built those, sometimes we've aggregated those where it made ecological sense. And we've aggregated them from the meows up to the entire GCRMN region, and then to the global level. In order to provide some high resolution information within each of the regions, we have done those statistical models for each of these sub-regions within each region so that we can understand which particular areas within each region are driving the regional trends and subsequently the global trends. So we've done this both for coral and for algae. And we've done this for each of the 10 GCRMN regions. So the report will have, this is essentially a preview of each or one of the 10 different chapters, and these will be aggregated, or these have been aggregated into a global story, which we will release in coming weeks with the formal launch of the report. So with the report, or the launch, clearly COVID has had a fairly significant impact. Opportunities to tag launches onto this major conferences and other events have slowly left us. Instead, we're going to do an independent launch in coming weeks. We will advertise that widely so that we can enhance the impact of the report as broadly as possible. We're currently working particularly with the ICRI Secretariat, UNEP and Vulcan to develop a communication strategy for the launch. We are particularly interested in working with other organisations, those particularly in the regions, so that we can enhance the messages of the report. And obviously we'll identify and advertise or let people know when that launch date actually is, but it will be in the very near future. With that, David, I'll hand back to you and the participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Very interesting to get that update on the GSAM Global Report. And certainly it's been quite a labor of love getting it out with such a global network to reach out to. And I think the team that has been leading that has done stellar work on that. I'd just like to remind all listeners that that you can ask questions in the chat, and they will come to me through secret people behind the scenes. So please do ask those questions. And I do have one question that has started to come through, David, so perhaps you can ask this one. The question is, this is an impressive achievement, congratulations, comment there. And then the question is the data set open access? Perhaps you can comment on that.
I would love to say yes to that. And it is my firm belief that as we progress as a network, that we do need to move towards open access data. However, in this particular case, and given the, I guess, the legacy sensitivities over data and how it is used and so forth, in order to encourage people to contribute data and in order to make sure that those people were recognised for their contributions and that those data wouldn't be used beyond the purpose of the report, we actually have procured those data under a fairly stringent data sharing agreement, which does limit the use of the raw data for the report. However, the modelled outputs from that will underpin essentially all the figures in the report, they're essentially derived results from the raw data. So while we can't make the raw data available, we can certainly make the modelled outputs available for people. It is, as I kind of mentioned in the presentation, it is a real I think a critically important thing for the GCRMN going forward to work with the broader community to be able to make these quite important data sets more publicly accessible and open access. And so our intent, once we've removed ourselves from the weight of the report, is to start working with the GCRMN community and some genuine data experts from around the world to start to establish protocols for sharing data and start to establish mechanisms to store data where appropriate and share data and even assist people with analysing those data so to enhance reporting. So going forward, I would hope to say, yes, we will make these data open access. The current situation is no, we can't make the raw data open access, but we can make the modelled outputs accessible.
Okay, thank you, David. I don't see any other questions coming through the chat. Perhaps I might make one myself, and this is from within the system and working as one of the regional coordinators. And if you have any thoughts on the networking process, it's been quite a challenge to compile all this data from individual teams on the ground through the various regional nodes into a global node. Perhaps you have some insights on that and how we can move forward and strengthen the network through these reporting processes.
The regional coordinators, as you know, David, play an absolutely critical role within the regions to, I guess, champion the GCRMN, champion methods for data collection. In your case, you're leading the way in terms of establishing essentially a regional database to assist with storing regional data, and that can absolutely be a model going forward. So I think what was evident in the process for collecting data is that there's an enormous variation across the network in terms of capability to collect, manage, store data. Some regions are very advanced, other regions less so. So we need to come up with a model where we can assist the regions that need assistance And we can build on examples from regions where there is really good capability and we can share across the network. And that's one of the great things about, I guess, having a core group of regional coordinators, is that we can all share experiences and draw on each other's expertise to assist the network broadly.
Okay, thank you very much, David, for that presentation. And I'll just remind listeners that you can access more information about the GCRMN on its website. It's www.gcrmn.net. So please welcome to that. And of course, when the report is out, it will be prominently featured there. So thank you, David. I think now we'll move into the next set of 10-minute presentations. Now we have 4 presentations on key topics relevant to the future of reefs and technical and policy work in the coming decades. And then we'll have a synthesis or wrap up on the future of reefs. The first talk will be by Dr. Margot Hein on coral reef restoration to improve ecosystem services. Now, Dr. Hein is a marine ecologist and lead consultant at MER Research and Consulting. She specializes in coral reef restoration and linking theory to practice. So, welcome, Margot, over to you.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much for this introduction. Can you all see the screen properly?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, I would just like to start by saying that as a Monegasque, it is a real privilege to have the opportunity to speak at the Monaco Ocean Week, and I'm very, very happy to be here. Today, I'll be talking to you about a brand new report that was released about 2 months ago on coral reef restoration. The report was led jointly by the UN Environmental Programme and ICRI. And the need for that report initially came from a resolution that was voted by the United Nations Environment Assembly in 2019. But the release of the report itself is quite timely because it is released as the first report to come out of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And that's something that we're pretty happy and proud about. The report was prepared by a team of about 20 global experts around the world. It is organized in 6 different parts. So the first 2 parts are all meant to give an updated definition on what coral reef restoration is, what are the methods, what are the goals that are used, as well as present some challenges and opportunities as we move forward in the field. Part 3 has to do with discussing the current debate on the worth of coral reef restoration in the face of climate change. Then we have a recommendation section in which we have some high-level recommendations that target governments and funding bodies, as well as some more targeted recommendations for practitioners and managers. And then conclusions, action plans, as well as some case studies of best practices coral reef restoration efforts from around the world. So the report itself was released along with a policy brief and a summary video. And all of those products are available to download for free on the Coral Restoration Hub on the ICRI Forum website. And I was also told that you can also download them directly on the live feed of this event today. Okay, so I'll now present you some of the key things that came out in the report. First, we provided an updated definition of what coral reef restoration is. And the key point here is that our new definition focuses away from restoring reefs toward historic baselines. Instead, we want to make sure that reefs are restored, keeping in mind future disturbances and focusing on restoring for resilience and ecosystem services. Second, we provide a list of goals. All those goals are long-term goals that are also focused on ecosystem services, and that across both ecological and social dimensions. And then we provide a list of methods that fall under the big umbrella of that term of reef restoration, because there's a lot more of coral reef restoration than just planting corals. So for example, here on this infographic, you can see that you have methods associated with what we call emergency restoration. Those methods include things like substrate stabilization, stabilizing loose colonies, or triage, which is the collection of loose coral fragments. And those emergency restoration actions might be most appropriate on reefs after some acute disturbances such as storm damage or ship groundings. Then we're listing the current interventions, which are all the interventions that are currently happening on reefs globally, such as substrate addition and manipulation. So that's artificial reefs and hybrid structures, for example, direct transplantation and coral gardening, as well as the collection of coral spawn from resilient colonies. And we also present in the report some of those interventions that are currently in research and development and at different stages of being ready to be implemented in the field. And those interventions include things like larval propagation, assisted gene flow, or also the opportunity to grow corals in laboratory conditions to match projected conditions at the end of the century, and hopefully increase the potential for adaptation and resistance. So all of these methods here are there to help move reefs from this degraded state towards this healthier state. But one important thing to keep in mind is that those will only be potentially successful if they are in combination with climate action and a reduction of anthropogenic pressures. So one of the key messages from the report is to address this current discussion on the worth of restoration, whether or not to restore in the face of climate change, whether we should only invest in climate action and forget about active intervention. And our message is a call for realism. What we're saying is that it is not an either or situation. Instead, we need multiple actions to be implemented concurrently so that we can provide coral reefs with the greatest hope for the future. In the face of climate change, it's very important to not oversell coral restoration for what it's not. It is not a quick fix. It's never an excuse for degradation, and it's not a solution on its own. So coral restoration is not going to save reefs. But on the other end of the debate, while hopefully we can fix climate change, there are lots of local benefits to coral restoration. And those benefits include promoting genetic diversity and the potential for coral species to adapt and change, helping prevent species extinction, assist with species migration, very importantly, continuing the provision of key ecosystem services that we all rely on, and finally, providing an opportunity for action and give a little bit of optimism in the mix. So all that discussion leads to some general recommendations. Those general recommendations include that, again, while it's not designed to mitigate climate change, coral restoration can be very useful to support resilience, and that especially at local scales. It shouldn't be mislabeled as a standalone short-term fix, but instead it needs to be implemented as part of broader management strategies, such as resilience-based management. There's still a lot of challenges associated with the implementation of coral restoration, and those challenges are mostly linked to the novelty of the field and the sense of urgency to address this coral crisis. And hopefully, as we move forward, those challenges will diminish. But in any cases, if restoration is to be used on reefs, it really must be carefully planned with both resilience and climate smart designs in mind. So as I said, we have those general recommendations. We also have specific recommendations in that report. Those specific recommendations are targeting principally managers and practitioners and are focused on goals and methods and based on expert surveys. So here on the right-hand side, you have an example of one of those big tables we have for goal-based recommendations. The idea being that if you have a specific goal in mind when starting your restoration effort, you can refer to that table and read what those 20 global experts think are key considerations. So say that you want to use coral reef restoration on a reef so that you want to promote reef resilience for climate change. You have to think of a timeline of, about 3 to 5 years, and I would say minimum 3 to 5 years. And key considerations would be to select your site and the project design based on climate smart models, select the species to use based on local knowledge of resilient coral assemblages and include functional redundancy. as well as integrate research on coral adaptation mechanisms. So moving on to some of the conclusions, these are the 5 key recommendations from the report. They're also highlighted in the policy brief. Those recommendations include that coral reef restoration strategies needs to be also integrated with threats and disturbance abatement strategies. We should incorporate projections of climate change impacts and site vulnerabilities in the design of the efforts. In the design of the efforts, the choice of sites and methods, we also need to consider ecosystem things such as the prevalence of diseases, the physical integrity of the reef, as well as connectivity of key species. We should engage stakeholders at each and every steps and maximize socioeconomic benefits to local communities, as well as monitor to allow for adaptive management and a better communication of outcomes. We also have 2 policy recommendations in the report. Those policy recommendations align with both the UN Decade and ICRI's objective. Recommendation number 1 is that policy plans and funding specific to coral restoration are needed to assist implementation at local, regional, and global scales. Recommendation number 2 is that coral reef restoration targets should be included in commitments as part of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And this one is important as we're really hoping that we can put coral reefs at the front of the debate as part of the new decade. In terms of next steps following this report, we're currently working on a project of a funding landscape for coral reef restoration efforts. That's an ICRI-led project. The aim of that new project is to have a better understanding of who's funding what in the field of coral reef restoration, as well and where, and hopefully identify limitations and steps to move forward as we move forward with implementation. And we're also working on an implementation guidelines, also led by ICRI, UNEP, and other global partners. And these guidelines will be very targeted documents organized by chapters on implementation subjects such as planning, design, monitoring, funding, and permitting, etc. So exciting space to keep in mind, and thank you very much, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Margot, for that very interesting presentation, and yes, a wonderful set of infographics and illustrations from the report to make it accessible and for people to use. I do have a question from the chat, but I think we'll have to hold it till the end of the presentations on algal removal. And I will just give listeners a reminder that you can you can see the report and the policy brief and watch a 90-second summary video on the ICRI Forum website on the page on coral restoration. So please do go and search for that online. I think you should be able to find it. The next presentation will come out to what Margot referred to in terms of setting the context for restoration is what's going to happen with climate change in coming years. And for this, we have Gabriel Grimstitch presenting on projections of future coral bleaching conditions using climate models. Gabriel is a program management officer with the United Nations Environment Programme and leads UNEP's work on coral reef, mangrove, and seagrass ecosystems. He has wide experience working in diverse coral reef regions, and previously has worked for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature and Cordio East Africa. Gabriel, over to you.
Thanks, David. Can you hear me okay, and can you see the screen okay?
I can hear you. I can't yet see your screen, but no doubt it's coming up.
Okay. Let me try again.
And just while Gabriel is doing this, we are getting a few questions coming in through the chat, so please do keep them coming. Some of them are being answered live, some of them we'll be able to get to from the presenters in the final question and answer session.
Okay, can you see the screen now?
Not quite yet.
Okay, I'm getting an error code. I think someone else must be screen sharing.
Do we need to give Gabriel permission? Just bear with us for a moment. This, of course, is part of our normal life now with Zooming all over the world as we try and connect across the planet. We don't see anything yet. Does the technical team know anything about this, or else if we try and switch the order of presentations just to give a chance to work this out?
I'll give you more rights to, maybe it will help you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, because I get an error code whenever I try to share the screen.
Yes, try again now.
Also, I got the same error code again.
Error code again.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to do an update of your version of Zoom.
Okay.
Perhaps what we can do is to switch order of presentations and go to Didier while perhaps you send your presentation, Gabriel. Oh. And so Didier Zoccola will present on the World Coral Conservatory. This is a Noah's Ark for corals to support survival of coral reefs, coral reef ecosystems. I think this presentation will be co-presented by Didier and Dr. Nadia Unais. And so I'll let you go ahead, Didier.
Okay. First of all, it's really my pleasure to. Give this presentation and to present this fantastic project that we have been working on with Didier Zoccola and the Scientific Center Monaco since 2 years. Then what we will present the World Coral Conservatory project that is led by the Scientific Center of Monaco and the Oceanographic Museum Institute, Prince Albert I, the first foundation in Monaco. Its aim is to give a new solution to save corals and more especially the biodiversity of the scleratinian corals. Didier? So just to remind you the value of corals reef, which area represent only 0.2 of the ocean surface, but contains one fourth of marine life species. So, of course, however, coral reef are in danger. The last report of IPCC highlights that with global warming of 2 degrees Celsius, virtually all coral reef could be lost by 2100. Of course, some action are already taken to try to save them, as such as the MPAs and other mechanisms, but it's not enough because global change can also affect these protected areas. So we need a new solution. And what is the solution? This World Coral Conservatory will act as Noah's Ark for coral species. It consists of creating a global center of repository for corals. And the originality is that we will use the worldwide public and private aquarium in the world. We proposed to create this conservatoire to set up and maintain a large collection of species and strain of scleratinian colony, at least 2/3 of known species, so it's our aim, in the form of living coral colony. And this work will be carried out by aquarium partners all around the world that will house these corals, because they will be chosen because we need aquaria that have the expertise to maintain and to reproduce coral. And it's not the case. There is a lot around the world, but it's not the case of all the aquarium. So what is the aim of this conservatoire or conservatory is to preserve biodiversity, to provide material for basic and applied research, to help the restoration effort, but also to communicate, sensibilize, and raise awareness of coral reef among the general public. So it's very important to let all the more biggest and important public to be aware of the situation, and it's the role of the aquarium in the world. So for that, we will rely on tools of communication, sensibilization, and mediation, such as an international platform promoting exchange between stakeholders, but also hobbyists and the general public. A network of data-based sharing that will help us to promote coral reef research and conservation, and also tools for decision makers and reef manager. So one of the aims is to preserve natural heritage, biodiversity, and resources. So how we will work? We have already a network of aquarium. Coral samples will be collected with a verified process in place to fulfill CITES and shipping requirement. These sample or colonies will be tagged and will be sent all over the aquarium of the world. Of course, we will try, when it's possible, to keep one sample in its native location and replicate samples housed in partner aquarium. Coral samples will be housed in internationally renewed public, as I said, aquariums who have achieved excellences in coral maintenance and breeding. We have already 17 on-land nursery and aquarium partners all around the world. We have set up the different protocols needed for this operation. And if I can say what is also interesting and new, it's that this project is a conservation project, is a project for science and also for management. So already 17, but it's only the beginning, and I let the floor to Didier Zocola from the Centre Scientifique de Monaco to speak more about the scientific part.
Thanks, Nadia. Do you hear me? Okay. The second aim is to provide biological material for research. First, for basic research, because the aim is to sequence the transcriptomes and the genome or more of 1,000 species, to perform biodiversity research, for example, to have a good overview of the species that comprise the scleractinian corals, but also perform research on evolution and also on adaptation of corals facing the global change. But we will also perform applied research, because sequences of transcriptomes will allow us to have barcodic sequence for coral species. And this barcodic sequence we will use for eDNA. You probably know that organism leaves DNA fragments in seawater that we call environmental DNA, eDNA. And this eDNA can be used by a manager and practitioner to monitor, to biomonitor their park. A second approach will be a biomedical and cosmetic application in search for the discovery of new bioactive molecules for cancer, for example, or cosmetics. And the third approach will be the assisted evolution approach, to make corals more resistant and more resilient to a global change. We have already built a consortium with a scientific institute, but it is only the beginning, and more institutes will join us later. The first aim is to help in restoration efforts. And of course, once resistant corals obtained with the assisted evolution approach, the WCC, the conservatory, will supply ONGs, NGOs, non-governmental organization involved in coral restoration to transplant directly corals or farm corals in local localization of degraded coral reef. For that, we are already in contact with several NGOs, and more particularly with the 50 reefs, which aims is to restore 50 reefs around the world. To summarize, so the aim of the conservatory is first to preserve corals by collecting them and maintaining them in on-land nurseries worldwide, and provide the material research for research for applied and basic research. This applied research will be used to restore after that degraded reef systems. And at last but not the least, this conservatory will be used to communicate. For example, to create a participative platform around the world for practitioners, managers, but also for general public. A database which will contain all the pictures and all the information about the different species for practitioners. And also at the end, it's also the aim is to raise public awareness to underline the importance and the vulnerability of the corals. These aims have been published in a paper last year, and you can find it freely in open access, but also here below your screen in the live feed in the ICRI meeting. Thank you.
If you allow me, Didier, I just want to add something just to make you understand why this network is important, this network of aquarium for raising awareness. To give you a number, it's a study that has been done in 2011. That means that now the number is more. The aquarium of the world reaches more than 800 million visitors. So perhaps that today we have 1 billion visitors. So we can really touch them directly with this platform. We will make communication, we will make exhibition, conferences, and many other activities to raise awareness. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadia and Didier. And I feel a bit like Captain Kirk of the Starship Enterprise thrown off course just then, and I neglected to introduce them properly. So just to complete, so Dr. Unais is a Vice President of International Affairs at the Oceanographic Institute in Monaco. And she's had a distinguished career winning multiple awards in Monaco, in her native Tunisia, and internationally. And Dr. Zokola is at the Centre Scientifique de Monaco and studies ocean acidification and impacts on calcification reef systems. And he's now the coordinator of this World Coral Conservatory. So now, not leaving any of our crew members behind, we go back to Gabriel Grimstitch of UNEP, and he's going to talk to us about future coral bleaching conditions using climate models. Over to you, Gabriel.
Thank you, David, and I apologize for the technical glitches before. Very happy to be online now, and thank you, Francis and Tom, for helping me out. I'd like to thank the Principality of Monaco for the opportunity to present here at Monaco Oceans Week. And what I intend to present to you today are the latest findings from a UNEP study on one of the great threats that currently face coral reefs today, coral bleaching. It's coral bleaching obviously caused mostly by warming temperatures in the ocean, and a warning of what climate change can do to ecosystems and ultimately to the entire planetary system. Thank you. So I'd like to start by reading to you an excerpt from the IPCC Spatial Report on the impacts of global warming of 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, which was already mentioned in the previous report, but just to kind of accentuate how serious the issue could be, or has been and could be, is this quote saying, mass coral bleaching and mortality are projected to increase because of the interactions between rising ocean temperatures, ocean acidification, and destructive waves from intensifying storms. At 1.5 degrees, approximately 70 to 90% of global coral reefs are projected to be at risk of long-term degradation due to coral bleaching, with these values increasing to 99% at 2 degrees. So the issue is quite serious. We've already seen increasing and more frequent coral bleaching events in the last couple of decades. Of course, 1998 was the first large global bleaching event. Since then, we've seen more global bleaching events in 2010, and then the longest and potentially the most destructive one from 2014 to 2017. Next slide, please. So I'm presenting the results of the main findings of a study that was produced by UNEP in collaboration with NOAA, with an NGO called Symbiosis, with the University of Miami, funded by the US Department of State, and with the very generous support of the Principality of Monaco. We produced the first report in 2017 using climate models to try and predict what coral bleaching conditions would look like in different parts of the world in the coming century. And this year we just updated this report using better climate models, newer climate models with higher resolution to produce new projections of future coral bleaching. So this is an update of the previous report, and this report is available for download on the UNEP website. Next, please. So the purpose of the report is, one, to present projections of coral bleaching conditions and make these projections useful to making decisions about how you go about managing and protecting and planning around conserving your coral reef. Two, to evaluate the implications of climate policy, so the Paris Agreement, and whether, what does failure to achieve this goal mean for coral reefs, and then comparing different what we call IPCC shared socioeconomic pathways, which I'll explain a little bit more later. And thirdly, to provide public access to the data. So all this data, all the data layers are available publicly to anybody who wants to access them and use them for their own purposes, especially for marine spatial planning. Next. So what do we mean by IPCC shared socioeconomic pathways? These were scenarios that have been produced by the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, of what future kind of scenarios might look like for climate change globally. There are many different scenarios that have been produced using the climate models by the IPCC, but we took two pathways that we believed might be representative of a potential future. The first one that we chose was the worst case scenario. So this is current rates of emissions continue, emissions grow, there's climate policy is not enacted, the world continues using fossil fuels to drive the global economy, and it's business as usual, really. The second scenario that we used is ambitious, but also plausible. It's what we call a middle of the road pathway. So it means that all the countries, all the nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement are achieved and overachieved. So that's 150% of the pledges are achieved. This does not mean that the Paris Agreement is achieved. So we'd still see more than 2 degrees warming. It just means that the current level of ambition that member states have made to the Paris Agreement is overachieved. And that's the second scenario that we looked at. Important to note that we used the latest climate models. So what's called the coupled model intercomparison project phase 6 generation of climate models, which are higher resolution and more accurate. And I'd also like to point out that we had two kind of expert climate modelers on the team who really did the analysis. Ruben van Hooijdonk and Jeff Maynard, working with NOAA and the University of Miami and Symbiosis. Thanks. Next. So what did we find with these models for potential of coral bleaching in the future? So under the worst case scenario, what we found was that annual severe bleaching conditions. So that means when coral bleaching conditions occur every year and giving little chance for coral reefs to recover. Under the worst case scenario, these conditions are expected to occur yearly at every coral reef, in 100% of the world's coral reefs. The average projected year for these conditions to occur yearly is in 2034. This is actually 9 years earlier than projected from the previous report. So that means that previous projections of future coral bleaching conditions were potentially underestimated using the previous climate models. So that's not great news. However, using the not so bad case scenario, the average year for projected timing of annual severe bleaching was 2045. So that's 11 years later than under the worst case scenario. So climate policy obviously would have an impact on that. What we did find very interestingly is that it's the impacts of potential coral bleaching are not uniform across the world. So there are parts of the ocean that are warming up faster than others. The projected exposure varies significantly among countries, but also within countries. And we find what we call climate refugia in many parts of the world. So these are what we define climate refugia as places where coral reefs were projected to experience these annual severe bleaching conditions later than 2044, so in 23 years. And we found that 6 of 20 countries that have the greatest reef, the greatest climate refugia, area of climate refugia, were, sorry, the screen is not visible there. But yeah, so Indonesia, Western Australia, the Bahamas, and just a second.
Sorry, I think that's Francis's doc is hiding a little bit at the bottom.
That's okay. So the 6 countries that we found with the largest kind of areas of potential climate refugia were so Indonesia, Western Australia, the Bahamas, Madagascar, India, and Malaysia. This doesn't mean that these are the only countries that have climate refugia within their coral reefs. And it doesn't mean that all the coral reefs in these countries are climate refugia. It just means that within the area of coral reef within these countries, there was a large percentage which were projected to be potential refuges against climate change. Next slide, please. Another innovation from this analysis was actually trying to incorporate coral adaptation within the models. So there is increasing scientific evidence that corals can adapt to increasing temperature, especially as they're continually exposed to bleaching conditions. And interestingly, coral adaptation had a very large potential impact on when we'd expect to see annual severe coral bleaching. So each quarter of a degree Celsius of assumed coral adaptation adds an extra 7 years to when we'd be projected to see annual severe bleaching. So it's quite significant. Even if we assume that corals can adapt to 2 degrees of climate change, more than 80% of the coral reefs would still be expected to experience annual severe bleaching this century. And although we don't know, to what extent corals can adapt to increasing sea temperatures, some level of adaptation is expected, especially with some species more than others. So if we assume 1 degree of adaptation, the global average year of this kind of annual severe bleaching timing is pushed back by almost 30 years. If no adaptation is assumed, so it's quite a significant kind of unknown within what will happen to coral reefs in the future. Next, please. And finally, just some practical uses of these data and what they can actually, how we could actually use them to protect coral reefs. One is, of course, marine spatial planning. So when designing marine protected areas, these data can be useful to try and understand where potential climate refuges might be within the protected areas and which coral reefs may be less or more vulnerable to coral bleaching in the future. So this has already been tried within spatial planning exercises. There are good examples from Malaysia and Hawaii, and I think a few others around the world as well. So this is, if you combine this information with other models, there's some real practical applications on, where to kind of really focus your efforts for conservation. We've also used these models and these reports to help to identify potential climate refugees for investments by the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. This fund was presented earlier in the week, during this week, a partnership between several UN agencies, between the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation, and also Vulcan, with investments with already support by the government of Germany, and some philanthropies. These reports are also useful for informing the IPCC reports that are produced every few years, to understand what's the impacts on coral reefs may be in the future by climate change. Next. And thank you very much. And I hope that you take the time to download the report and give it a read.
Thank you very much, Gabriel, for that. It's a very sobering presentation on climate impacts on coral reefs. And yes, I think really to emphasize that information is public access and people can get to it and look at it, think ahead about what may be happening in your part of the world. I think I'll have to move straight on to the next presentation, which is on the importance of considering coral reefs at the international level. This presentation is going to be given by Emily Corcoran. And Emily is a consultant to the International Coral Reef Initiative, and she has been shepherding ICRI members through coral reefs in the new Convention on Biological Diversity Global Biodiversity Framework. Over to you, Emily.
Thank you very much, David. Firstly, can you hear me and can you see a screen?
Yes, but can you change the to presenter mode?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, should be
perfect.
Good now. Great. Thank you very much for that introduction and very good to be here. Thank you for allowing us the time to talk to you a little bit about this work. So over the last over 2 years now, I've been working with a group of colleagues, again, as David mentioned for his presentation. This is not a solo effort at all. Work with a very engaged group of people to contribute to the development of the new biodiversity framework under the Convention on Biological Diversity. And our focus is very much to try and ensure that coral reefs are appropriately included within this new strategic framework. In this presentation, I'll be using this work to talk a little bit more broadly about why it is so important that coral reefs are included and considered in international level discussions. My entry point will be the Global Biodiversity Agenda, but of course, I just wanted to emphasize the critical linkages with climate change and sustainable development tracks of negotiation. As part of our work to engage with the CBD process, we have been collecting a range of perspectives on why coral reefs are important and why they are relevant to take into consideration in the development of the Global Biodiversity Framework. These views and perspectives are represented by quote cards that you will see are used throughout this presentation. And so I'll be using their words to help present 3 arguments as to why I see it is important that coral reefs receive this global attention. As a bit of a spoiler alert, those 3 arguments are fundamentally that coral reefs are a global asset and they provide wide-ranging benefits. The second is that the cost of losing coral reefs is not only one that be felt by those countries and people that are close to reefs, but by all of us. And thirdly, that understanding this global ecosystem requires coherent monitoring and assessment to inform policy development and implementation. A lot of the graphics that you'll see and the assets that we've been developing through this work stream have been we've had a lot of help from colleagues at Vulcan, and these are available in multiple languages at coralpost2020.org that you'll see conveniently located at the bottom of every slide. So it gives you a chance to note it down for future reference. See, zoomed by too fast. So first, I just want to take a quick step back to give a little bit of background as to why ICRI has engaged in this CBD process. You may well recall that the 5th Global Biodiversity Outlook was published not that long ago in September last year. And it reported that none of the HE biodiversity targets were met under the previous CBD Strategic Action Plan. HE Target 10, which explicitly related to coral reefs, had perhaps the worst results. Hard coral cover continues to decline in many regions, as we saw from David's first presentation on the status report, and threats from key pressures continue to increase. What was notable is that this target really struggled not only with the complexity of its ambition, but the unrealistic timeframe that was set, and also a lack of available and meaningful indicators that could track implementation. The inclusion of a coral-specific target did, however, have some important benefits, particularly in leveraging action to conserve and protect coral reefs. And this relates to a question that I've seen coming up in the chat already about what some thoughts are around how important, or what do we lose if coral reefs are not specifically mentioned? And perhaps this is something we can pick up in the discussion. Oops, done it again. Coral reef ecosystems continue to be both highly valuable and critically vulnerable to both global and local stresses. ICRI felt it was important to be able to ensure that this new framework under the CBD could continue to reflect the urgent need for action to prevent the collapse of coral reefs. So it set up an ad hoc committee to take the work forward. This committee comprised country and organisation representatives and has led to the adoption of a consensus ICRI recommendation on how coral reefs can be prioritised in the global biodiversity framework. Through this recommendation, CBD parties are strongly encouraged to include clear, specific and actionable indicators for coral reefs in the monitoring element of the global biodiversity framework. And I will come back to those a little bit later. But for now, back to those 3 arguments. So coral reefs are a global asset, and humanity derives diverse benefits from healthy functioning reefs. These range from food security, protecting shorelines, and providing jobs, amongst a huge range of other things. Economic valuations have been attempted, and there's a recent estimate by Constanza and colleagues from 2014 that calculates this as just under $10 trillion per year. There are some regions, especially in the many small island or rather large ocean states, where the connection to reefs and the realization of these benefits is very direct, as here for the Maldives, where reefs underpin key economic sectors. And importantly, coral reefs are deeply connected with culture and identity across generations. Second argument is that we all suffer if coral reef ecosystems are lost. We have heard in recent assessments from Ipcc, from the IPCC, and also from previous speakers, that without coordinated and urgent action, we're on a trajectory for a future with either very different version of coral reefs or an ecosystem that has entirely collapsed. And so what does this mean and for whom? It is clear that it's not a local niche issue. The collapse of coral reefs and the myriad of species that they support, the loss of the benefits they provide, won't just impact the reef-dense countries such as Fiji, but the oceans will be knocked out of balance with systematic effects that are broad-reaching and global, with humanitarian, ecological, and economic consequences. Averting ecosystem collapse in order to sustain these benefits will require coherent and urgent action at multiple scales. Global policy frameworks are not an answer in and of themselves, but they can provide a unifying structure and direction that is critical for ensuring every effort can cumulatively enable recovery and restore healthy functioning reefs. The solutions for reducing pressures also require addressing a whole range of human activities from many different sectors under the responsibility of many different areas of government. This need is really well recognized and talked about a lot in the discourse. But now these synergies need to be realized in implementation across the whole of government and whole of society. The third point and final point is that coherent monitoring is critical for understanding impacts of actions and also accountability. Being able to understand progress is really important. And it turns out that we're improving at this and actually getting pretty good, with still a whole bunch of challenges, as again expressed by David. But we do have methods, expertise, and ever-growing experience. ICRI has recommended the inclusion of 6 indicators that, if applied consistently across countries, will help strengthen the evidence base for decision-making and understanding whether what we are doing is having the desired effect. So these are the 6 indicators that ICRI has recommended. And as mentioned by Monsieur Fortier at the beginning, ICRI now has over 44 country members, custodians to 75% of the world's coral reefs. And so those countries and organizations that have endorsed this recommendation and adopted it have a strong representation of the voice of coral reef countries around the world. Including these indicators is really critical for enabling visibility of this ecosystem in the new global biodiversity framework. It's also important for continuing to build capacity to assess coral reefs globally and increase the accessibility and coherence of the evidence base. David said I should point out some of the where there are overlaps in these indicators, and you'll see a crossover in the status report here with indicator 1, live coral cover, and also 3, fleshy algae cover and cover of benthic, key benthic groups. Also, fish data is also recognized as playing an important role in the future. So as for our next steps, we will continue to draw attention to this vulnerable and valuable ecosystem in the run-up to COP15, which will be held in Kunming in China in October of this year. We'll continue to work with partners across the ICRI community to support CBD partners in negotiating an outcome that will be able to drive urgent and coherent action that is so needed to protect the future of coral reefs. And in closing, I borrow some extra words, a few more words, that the protection of the ocean is a global challenge requiring global action, not least for coral reefs. With that, thanks for your attention. And here you can find not only that web address again, but also contact details for myself and also Francis if you would like to discuss any of these issues further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily, for taking us through that international process around coral reefs. And I think some questions and for a great weaving of voices too, to build your presentation together from some of the leading lights that we have in protecting and conserving coral reefs around the world. So now as a conclusion, we'll move to the last speaker, and who'll speak on the future of coral reefs before we come back to all the questions that we've received from various participants. So Dr. Joni Kleypas is from the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Colorado. And she does research on climate and oceanographic modeling to help identify coral reef refugia based on the expected impacts of climate change. So over to you, Joni.
Thank you so much, David. And I really want to appreciate express my appreciation for so many good talks before I bring this particular discussion up about some of the future work that we might want to address. And so what this, I'm trying to move this off my screen so I can actually see it. I want to first thank everybody for hosting this, particularly ICRI, who's done a tremendous job, as we've seen throughout this entire session, and their support of so many things of bringing coral reefs to the forefront. And also to the Prince Albert Foundation, because they have been a consistent and significant supporter of so many ocean issues, including coral reefs, for so many years. And I think that's exactly the kind of commitments that we need, as I will talk about in this talk. So this, I don't have a very formal report to present as all of you have. This is more a work in progress, a discussion in progress. And it has begun with a couple of meetings. One is at the Pew Fellows Program in Marine Conservation a few years ago. Some of the participants were really trying to talk about scalability of reef ecosystem restoration. And then the Ocean Solutions Initiative, which was really led by Jean-Pierre Gattuso, to look at global and local measures to reduce the risks of climate change on coral reefs. And I'm going to present some of the ideas. It will actually feed on or follow up on a lot of the same type of information that was presented previously. Trying to get it to advance. Okay, so one of the first things we did, this follows on Gabriel's really nice presentation and report. We also did some analyses of how coral reefs will respond to climate change. So on the left-hand side, we looked at average temperature across all of reef locations worldwide. We looked at the two scenarios. One was the RCP 8.5, the high emission scenario, and then the lower emission scenario, which is closer to the Paris targets. We used those temperature projections to actually look at how reefs would respond in terms of how often will reefs experience severe bleaching. We used a threshold of 2 times per decade, which we considered unsustainable based on previous literature. And we compared how reefs would do under a no adaptation scenario and a scenario where they can adapt over time, looking at historical temperatures as a way to encourage them to adapt. And what we found, if you look at the no adaptation scenario with the solid lines, it didn't matter which scenario we were on, we were going to see both high and low projections resulting in unsustainable bleaching by the middle of the century. The hopeful part of this is that with adaptation included, and this is somewhat ambitious adaptation, but it's not with, but it's certainly within what is known for corals, at least some corals for today. It does buy time for the high emission scenario, but in the low emission scenario, what we really find is that corals can, if they can adapt fast enough, that they can withstand these kinds of temperature changes in the low emission scenario. The other part of the discussion was the types of actions that can be taken. So a lot of people have talked about, you know, what are the state of coral reefs? And what are the various types of things that can be done, we looked at a whole suite of different actions that can be done to address protecting coral reefs into the future so that they can be sustained beyond the middle of this century. And what we found was that we looked at three different things. One is addressing the causes of climate change. So that's basically not something a coral reef scientist actually does, but it's actually a promotion of what we think is the most important thing we can do for coral reefs. The second suite of actions that we looked at were supporting biological, ecological, and societal adaptation. So these are in the inner ring in colored and green, and it's a whole suite of things that you would be familiar with. Improved governance and regulation, marine protected areas, many things that we're already doing now, but also some more innovative things, including coral reef restoration, looking at managed relocation and assisted gene flow, assisted adaptation and evolution, and assisted fertilization and recruitment. And then the third thing is manipulating environmental conditions. This is in the broad category of managing solar radiation or geoengineering. And so we just had a quick look at that and evaluating its effectiveness. We actually asked all 21 people across these two meetings for their expert evaluation of what these proposed actions would do for the next 20 to 30 years. We asked them to rank these different measures based on effectiveness, readiness, co-benefits, such as are there additional benefits from carrying out that proposed action, or disbenefits, are there adverse consequences related to those actions, and then acceptability by society, cultures, and politically. We also asked them to look at the scale of each one of these measures. These are some of the results, the quick results averaged across all of the responses. Of course, addressing climate change had the highest scores at the top. Excuse me, let me see if I can go back. Addressing climate change had the highest scores at the top. And then amongst those measures to support adaptation, most of these scored fairly moderately, with the existing things that we're doing right now scoring more highly than some of the more innovative things that were, considered a little, less tested and more risky. And then the geoengineering solutions had the lowest scores. Just ranking each one of these things, what we found is, again, just echoing the last slide, but just reordered a little bit. You can see that a lot of these things ranked based on what things that we're doing already, but you also had some things like assisted fertilization and recruitment creeping up into this, basically the top half of recommended solutions. And then at the bottom, we had pretty low rankings for the geoengineering solutions. When we looked at all these solutions and you say, okay, we know coral reefs are in trouble. We know they're worth a lot to us, to society. How do we organize? There are many of us organizing, ICRI being one of the main ones, the main one, trying to organize to help find and implement solutions for coral reefs. But can we learn lessons from other big challenges? We often hear from people that we can save coral reefs if we just mimic the moonshot. So we looked at a couple of examples of big challenges and how they have been met by society, and try to use them as a model for this sort of what we can do for coral reefs. This is the moonshot. It was the Apollo 11 mission. I've broken these things down into agencies, components, and motivation. This was a mainly technical challenge, and so it's not that applicable to coral reefs, but it is applicable to helping solve the climate crisis. One of the interesting things about this is, and this comes up over and over again, in the role of communication and getting society involved, it had a strong national backing and it invoked a strong national pride. Some other big challenges are really associated with health, human health. The war on cancer is one of the longest running missions that has been undertaken to basically to solve cancer. But also recently we're seeing these pandemics and how society how governments, for better or worse, actually tackle this problem. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned. So the War on Cancer started 50 years ago. It was really spearheaded by some upper level organizations. This is more similar to what we're facing with coral reefs because it's biological, and it makes it a very complex issue. The motivation for curing cancer was like, we're going to cure cancer within X number of years. Of course, those numbers keep slipping. But these are some really interesting lessons learned, even though this is a really good, could be a good model for coral reefs. It also, we need to expect mixed results. It's going to take 20 to 30 years to figure out how to do this, and there are going to be many lessons learned along the way. So these are just ways to think about how we organize. Excuse me. And then the National Cancer Act, as an example, was also this. If you look at the components on the left, you see that a lot of those components are the same things we're looking at. You could replace the word reef in a lot of those components. The lessons learned is that it had very strong organization, funding, and backing. The bottleneck has been, yes, we can develop technologies and solutions for reefs, but deployment is the hard part. And there's been a lot of success in reducing cancer, not necessarily through treatment, but through changing human behavior. And so when I talk about the components of a blueprint to save coral reefs, we can also look at the various agencies that should be involved. Two main things that we are pushing for this: economic value of coral reefs, as Emily said, is in the trillions of dollars. We should find a program that's funded commensurate with that. Part of a broad organized strategy, pulling in what everybody has talked about today, advocating for limited warming, organization around a plan, a central plan that builds on previous and existing efforts. Also prioritize specific objectives, because just saying you want to save coral reefs is not enough, and Emily outlined a lot of those. We need to deploy and enforce proven actions, while in the meantime developing new actions that can be deployed in the field. And that deployment into the field can be done through established networks, like the regional networks of the GCRMN, and that can push things into the field by engaging communities to implement those solutions. And then, of course, outreach and community engagement is critical for getting the funding and the backing to that. So I'll just end there with my points, because I know I'm over time. But I just want to make the case that we have 20 or 30 years, we need to move fast. We're not telling people how to do this, we're just telling them that it is really a good time to quit talking about the plight of coral reefs, but to actually put a lot of these solutions into a plan so that they can be done more efficiently. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Joni, for an excellent synthesis talk at the end, presenting the way forward, or a way forward, and how we really have to think in terms of moonshots, and thinking big and acting right away, because the science does tell us we only have a couple of decades in which to get this right. So I'll go straight into some great questions we've had from the chat, and perhaps this relates, I'll ask these to any of the presenters, are welcome to talk, but perhaps this first one touches a little bit on Joni's last comments, and Gabriel as well, and it's thinking about worst case scenarios for coral reefs, and the loss of reefs. Do you feel that this means coral reefs or corals will disappear completely, or are we just looking at a severe loss of biodiversity, but some adaptation and some remaining species or function? Perhaps you can comment on that.
Well, I can give it a shot. I can give it a shot, because I do agree that a lot of the work that Gabriel was talking about, and the work that I'm doing as well, is that we are able to find refugia for coral reefs. They may be small pockets. They are related to physical oceanographic conditions. But I do believe that we will find places where coral reefs will exist. But they will be diminished in biodiversity, as you said. The idea is, how do we support those pockets of coral reefs so that when we do reach a point where climate is stabilizing, that the reefs will have the opportunity to come back. And that's a real planning in terms of understanding coral populations, connectivity, and you know, how these things can persist into the future with our assistance, with the power, you know, using the power of restoration and reproduction and other, you know, assisted migration. How can we use those things most effectively? So I think, yes, things will continue to get bad, but my message is usually if we can stabilize climate, and actively interact with these ecosystems to improve them, then we can watch them turn around in the end of that period of 20, 30 years.
Thank you, Joni. That does lead to a follow-on question to Margot, perhaps, on restoration, and that's looking to the future and what we may need from restoration in 20 or 30 or 40 years' time. Perhaps you can comment on what restoration is doing now, what we need to do in terms of investing in research and innovations that won't deliver for quite some time, but perhaps we'll need them in a few decades' time.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very interesting question, and I think one of the real key challenges in restoration at the moment is first to be able to scale up the efforts that are currently underway. So at the moment, we can only, you know, restore reefs of a few hectares at the very most, and that's perfectly fine for local challenges. But when we look at the scale of coral degradation, we're going to need to be able to scale up the approaches that are currently applied. The second challenge is to really use all of those innovations and technologies that are coming up. Restoration, the field grew up from scientists trying things in the field, and we love using PVC pipes and cable ties and, you know, kind of like gardening underwater, but it's a technical and a huge challenge ahead of us to change and make those methods evolve so we can have a much greater cost effectiveness of what's being used. There's so much investment in research and development at the moment. The Reef Restoration and Adaptation program that's currently underway in Australia comes to mind, especially in trying to solve all of those different solutions that Joni was presenting. And I like the idea that we think a lot of those are completely crazy in terms of manipulating the environmental conditions, but maybe as the research develops, we'll realize that they're necessary and maybe quite applicable. So I think in 20, 30 years, I hope we'll have developed technologies to better understand connectivity of reefs so we can use those pockets of refugia, use the built-in resilience of coral reefs to assist with restoration, and also be bold in our actions, because it's a great challenge and we need to fix that crisis if we can.
Thank you, Margot. So that does touch on a question that came in from Sibylla Reed-Miller, and in which she notes that so there's a lot of focus now on dynamic MPA designs for changing climate. So because climate belts are moving, you know, how can we design protected areas? A lot of these around fisheries that can follow fish populations as they move north or south. But these stationary features such as coral reefs are being forgotten in the process. Are we giving up on these, or what are we doing to promote these as well? I think several of you have mentioned climate refugia, and so I'll just open that up for any comments from the panelists on the stationary protected areas and how can we promote those and what do we need from them. So please, just welcome to speak up.
I'll speak up on that. Coral reefs are stationary as adults, but their larvae are mobile. And that is a big part of the study of connectivity is when coral reefs spawn, when they're mass coral spawning events or just spawning in general, are there places where they can recolonize? That goes as well to looking for places to undertake what's called assisted migration. So moving corals from places where they environmental conditions have become too harsh to places where they can survive in the future. That's a new technology, but it is something that is being considered in the future, but it does need some risk assessment associated with those studies. The larval dispersal one is one that quite a few people have been looking at. And so we're not abandoning coral reefs as stationary features. We're looking to where they can colonize in the future.
Yes, thank you, Joni. That's a great answer for that one. I might take one of the questions that's being addressed towards the World Coral Conservatory now and project in terms of genetic diversity. How does the project look at maintaining genetic diversity of the conserved species into account? Perhaps you can address that, Didier.
We will sample different in different locations the same species, and also different population of the same species in the same location. It's why we try to make a diverse collection of the same species, and of course of different species. For example, if you have Stylophora in Red Sea, you can have Stylophora in Pacific or in the Indian Ocean, and we can collect different population in the same place, but also in different locations.
Okay, thank you, Didier. Of course, the challenge being addressed is how do you try and maintain, such a breadth of genetic diversity across a whole species in sample collections. And the project will endeavor to do that. And of course, there's the spread of partners around the world is a key platform in being able to do that, to try and collect samples from the same species from many different locations. We're coming closer to the end now, and I thought I might come to some of the policy questions that have come up. So this might be addressing Emily's talk, or if others can address these too, is that is it a problem that we're seeing underrepresentation of coral reefs and marine ecosystems in the Global Biodiversity Framework draft? We had an HE target on coral reefs, and now we don't have a target that specifically mentions coral reefs. Is that a problem, or how do we leverage what we do and what we know and what people love about coral reefs to make the new framework stronger than the last one?
Thanks. A good question, and actually I'll try and take it in a couple of parts. So firstly, the underrepresentation of marine ecosystems, absolutely see that as a problem in the current draft, and something that ICRI has provided feedback on. That ICRI members would like to see that strengthened, as have a number of parties to the CBD as well. Specifically, coral reefs. We had a H target 10, a coral reef target in the previous strategic action plan. But as I mentioned in my presentation, the outcome, which is the important thing, was not successful. So perhaps it's not specifically having the words coral reef that's important to have in the framework, but the space that is appropriate and the wording that helps undertake activities and support countries implement activities that are supportive of coral reefs is what's important. And so as an example of that, the current wording of one of the targets, target 1, talks about targets for restoration. Making sure that that target is suitable and helpful for coral reefs will be the most important thing. And then the final part is that the measurability. What really helps implementation is being able to see how you're doing and being able to track progress. Previously, HE Target 10 essentially used live coral cover as an indicator, and many of the elements couldn't be measured. So what we've recommended through the ICRI recommendation is a broader suite of indicators that can be used in the monitoring of the new Global Biodiversity Framework that we believe could really strengthen the visibility of coral reefs in a more practical and tangible way. So that's where I think there is real importance in making sure those indicators are retained as an important step.
Okay, thank you, Emily. So I think coming to the end of this session, I think there's an immense challenge ahead of us, clearly, and I think all the panelists have made that really clear. And change doesn't come just from scientists or just from managers, doing the right things on the ground, or even just countries either, and government departments. It really comes from changing behaviors and getting people to commit to action and taking action where they can. So perhaps if I can get a word, Nadia, you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation about zoos and aquaria reaching close to 1 billion people worldwide now. How can we get this message out to audiences around the world that coral reefs really matter, and how do we communicate the urgency without stifling the willingness to act? I think that was a question that Journey you put at the beginning. And if we could wrap up with some comments on communication from you, and if any of the other panelists would like to comment on that, please do raise your hand so I can see you. Okay, Nadia, please.
Merci, merci David. Sorry, David, I switch in French. So naturally, yes, this is very important, and you have to know that the first mission of the aquarium world is not only to keep animals and corals in aquaria just for beauty or to have fun, but also for conservation and sensibilization. And what is important to know that we use this beauty to give emotion, and as the Prince Albert first says, our mission, the mission of all the aquarian institutions like ours, is to know, to love and to protect the ocean. Why? Because we can love only what we can protect only what we know, and we can love only what we know, and we can protect only what we love. So with different tools. In Monaco, if I take this example, we really try to reconstruct as better as possible the real ecosystem using only live animals, live corals, different invertebrates, and even the system of filtration is a natural one to try to copy the nature, because this is the most wonderful thing we can give to the visitors. And of course, our aim is when a visitor comes to see us, we would like, when he leaves, to have in his mind something that touched him and some know-how about different aspect of the ocean life. We have in Monaco half of the aquarium dedicated to reef corals, as we have been the first aquarium in the world to be able to maintain in a closed system, in ex situ system, sclerotin and corals, so we were able to reproduce a real ecosystem. So and what we have the possibility to touch, as I told you, more than 1 billion visitors. So we make exhibitions, we give different tools, digital tools. We share, of course, all the information, but with how can I say, less scientific words, more the word that the general public can understand, because too long, the scientist has been in their own place, and it was difficult for them to make the general public, the journalist, the politics to really understand. So mediation is also one of the mission, and it's the principal mission of the Oceanographic Institute, but also to the aquarium, try to have the best and the knowledge, and try to give the best solution to give this information and to educate people. And of course, we have also educational program. We work with all school, universities, and they a part of their program is done in the aquarium, because it's a laboratory, and you can do a lot of things and understand directly, instead of reading a book or just staying at in the class and listening to the professor.
Thank you for that, Nadia. Yes, a real clarion call for public education and people getting to know and love coral reefs and their environment and to do something about it. And any other final words from panelists just to wrap up the session? I'll be happy to keep it open for a moment. Otherwise, from myself, if Journey, are you looking like you do want to say something? So.
I was reading some of the comments in the chat.
Sorry. Okay.
But I would like to say that this social engagement is very important. So I think this is one of the aspects of reef restoration that is often not noticed as much as the actual growing of corals, is when you engage local people, they really learn about their reefs, they're educated, they do exactly what Nadia was saying, they fall in love with it and they want to protect it. So the more we can engage local people in these efforts for solutions, the better they will be for putting in new solutions, and the more backing they will have, kind of like the Apollo program, they will support reef restoration or reef solutions because they are part of it.
Yes, I think that's a great message to end on. And we've seen that as well with fishing communities in East Africa as well, is that once you learn how corals grow and you take care of them, you take greater care about the things that you do. And I think that engagement is really everything. So I think it's time to wrap up this panel, which has been a great experience. We've had some great comments and thanks in the chat from various participants. This is the time to act for coral reefs. And we can say, certainly in terms of climate change, if we save coral reefs, we save everything else because it is that most sensitive system. And that's not to be selfish about getting all resources to coral reefs, but really seeing what's tipping off first and how do we make sure that doesn't happen to every other ecosystem as well on the Earth. So thank you, panelists, for your insights. Thank you to the audience for attending this 2-hour session. Thank you to Prince Albert Foundation and for this platform for coral reefs in the Monaco Ocean Week. And I look forward to all the action that we'll have following from this. So good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Great people.